Good morning, everyone. It's very good to be here, and I hope you've been enjoying the conference so far. So this is my title, Socio-Technical, the Pathway to Trustworthiness, Quality and Value in Data Linkage. Now, you might be thinking that I've taken a bet to see how many multi-syllable words I can get into my conference title, but I will unpack each of these terms and explain the work that they do in what I want to say. So at the Office for Statistics Regulation, we think of our work as being socio-technical. And our starting point is this, a day in the life of data. Now, many people will give presentations where they talk about data as a journey, or the journey of a piece of data. And to some extent, that's what we're doing here, but we're doing it from a different perspective, because we're not talking about a piece of data, its life, as it sort of moves through various parts of process. We're talking about people. And in fact, what we do in this is we conceptualize what we think of as being an ordinary household, an ordinary family, and their engagement with data. So imagine this household. They wake up in the morning, they're having their breakfast, the radio is on in the background, and they vaguely hear something in the news part of the radio show that house prices are going up. And that kind of triggers in them the thought, you know, maybe it's time that we found out how much our house is worth. They don't think much more of it. It's just like kind of lodged as a thought that they might want to do. But of course, it's derived from that experience of hearing being prompted by some data information which is intermediated through a radio show. Their children go to school. It's a school that they as parents believe is a good school. They're not, you know, if you were to probe them and say, why do you think it's a good school? They'd probably say, well, people tell us it's a good school. They might say, we've got a sense it's been inspected and got a high rating. But behind that, there might be a sense of, well, you know, we've heard that they get good results, that their attainment levels are high. Again, there's a degree of kind of engagement with data, which is not very overt, but it's there. Then they drive to work. And they drive to work and they see on their real-time traffic app that they should avoid the bridge because there's some roadworks. That's being presented to them as data. They don't really think of it, it's just a message, but it's data guiding their life. And then at work, I'm imagining that these are people who are working in, let's say they're working in marketing or something like that, and they have to do their sales projections. And one thing they've got to factor into their sales projections is, well, what do we think the rate of inflation is doing? And they put that into their spreadsheet and they start to work with it. That's their working day. And then they get home, and when they get home, they find a leaflet on their doormat, and the doormat leaflet says that there's a proposal to build a new waste incinerator in their local community, and some people don't like it, and they've put in their leaflet to say, you know, protest against this waste incinerator, some statistics about the impact of waste incineration on, you know, health in the local community. So in this ordinary day that I'm imagining, data, statistics, insights from data and statistics are cropping up. Only one of those, the work one, is there an overt, direct, purposeful, deliberate choice to say, in my work, I'm going to plug some numbers into a spreadsheet. But in fact, woven through the fabric of this day, I'm really sorry, is this really disconcerting, all the kind of microphone noise? I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the lectern, and could you switch the microphone off? Because I think is that okay? And we'll move on to these. Is that all right? Brilliant, thank you. It's interwoven into the fabric of their day. So that's sort of what we mean by socio-technical. It really became something profound in our work when we did a review of the way that algorithms were used to set grades for school children in the UK in the summer of 2020. Those of you who are UK-based will know the story well. I won't recount it. The only point is to say that we published a review which analysed how the algorithms had performed and the lessons that were learned. And the head of the Ada Lovelace Institute, which is a think tank which is focused on data and society, said, I see that the Office for Statistics Regulation are taking a socio-technical perspective, which was, I'm afraid, not a word at that point I'd ever heard. I thought that's kind of interesting. I got in contact with her and she explained it to me, and I started to realize that this is actually what we do. We are actually socio-technical. So that's really what I'm going to talk about, that how we at OSR, we're not technical, we're socio-technical, and I'm going to do that first of all by talking about us, our purpose as the Office for Statistics Regulation. Then I'm going to talk briefly about the public good, and then I'm going to talk about something which I think is the core to today, which is data sharing and linkage. So the Office for Statistics Regulation. In institutional terms, we are the regulatory arm of the UK Statistics Authority, statutory role to promote and safeguard the production and publication of official statistics, independent producers, including of the ONS. So a big chunk of my work, actually especially at the moment, is overseeing what ONS do and reporting publicly on how the ONS is doing. In terms of what we produce, our outputs, three types. We spend a lot of our time looking at how statistics are produced. We review them against the code of practice. We accredit them with that kite mark that you can see there. We also are willing to step into public debate where we see that statistics are not being used appropriately. And you'll see there on my slide, I've got two screenshots, one about a former Prime Minister making a claim about crime, and the other about a former Home Secretary making a claim about migrants. Current politicians are available as well, I can assure you. And we also do some work on how statistics are valued, and my colleague Sophie Nixon, who I think is here somewhere, is leading that work and is a fantastic presenter, so I really recommend you try and find an opportunity to hear her speak. And our philosophy is that when you think about statistics, in any context, they're not just numbers. They're numbers which exist in a context. And that leads us to focus on trustworthiness, quality, and value. Trustworthiness is about the institutional environment, the people, the systems, and the processes which produce the statistics. Quality is about the statistics themselves, whether they fit their uses, whether they are using appropriate data and methods, and value is about ease of use, insight, relevance, and so on. We're actually consulting at present on whether we need to update this code of practice. So if you go to our website, you'll see ways that you can express a view on that. So that's kind of who we are and what we do. In July this year, we published a report on data sharing and linkage for the public good. We were reviewing how the UK government makes shared and linked data available for research use. We talked about the public good, and it's just worth to take a little moment about what we mean by this. Again, my colleague Sophie has done a huge amount of work to say, what does this single phrase, public good, actually mean? And our working definition, which is sort of evolving all the time as we consult with more people and we engage with people, we are getting more and more insight into what this concept actually means in practice. This is our current iteration of that definition. Data and statistics are public assets that provide insight, which allows them to be used widely for informing understanding and shaping action. Several important words in there. In fact, we have a presentation which breaks the whole phrase down into multiple, unpacks each term. But I just want to pick out public assets. Really important to understand that data and statistics are not actually just for government, to enable government itself to make policy. They are for a broader public use. Providing insight, there's no point having data and statistics if they don't tell you anything. And used widely is a crucial phrase there. It's no good having statistics if they're just, so to speak, sat on a shelf. If they're just shelfware, delightful phrase that somebody used to me recently. Statistics are just shelfware. So that's what we mean by the public good. So why did we review data sharing and linkage? Well, to us, if administrative data sets in government are to serve the public good, in line with that definition I've just used, they must be linked, because it's only when they are linked that you get the real insight into the social phenomena that you're trying to understand. And not enough just to be linked, they must be shared. In other words, they're not just for government, but they're for users outside government. So that's what led us to say, well, what is the state of play on data sharing and linkage? Now, being socio-technical, we immediately then thought of, well, who are the people who this report is about and for? And we developed three personas who we thought were the people for whom this report is a relevant and important input. The first was, we imagined a government researcher. Some of you may be analysts who work in government. You will have a clear data mission. We imagined a government researcher who has the data mission to link up data held by the Department for Education with records from the criminal justice system, because they want to understand the links between a criminal background in a family and educational outturn. So that government researcher has a data mission, and we wanted to see whether data sharing and linkage was working for them. Secondly, we thought of an academic, a university professor. I'm sure many of you in the room would fit this category. Data mission, again, linking data from multiple parts of government. We imagined somebody who wanted to understand the links between health, education, and inequality, poverty. So that's a clear data mission requiring both linked and shared data. And the third persona we imagined, and it'd be interesting to know how many of this persona there are represented in the room. I would hazard a guess less. We imagined somebody who works in the charity sector, maybe in a homelessness charity. They deliver a service to a particular client group, maybe a client group that's very vulnerable, and they want to understand what works and what doesn't. And they want to understand evidence that will help them do a better job for the actual human beings that present to them on a daily basis. That service coordinator, how would they know what the data available for them is? So we thought of these three personas, and then we thought, well, how is the current system of data sharing and linkage working for those three personas? So we did say that since 2019, when we'd done a previous report on this subject, there was some really good progress. And just in the interests of some people in the room who I know will be happy to hear me say this, second bullet, the rise of ADR UK. So I hope ADR UK is really happy to hear me say that. Clearly ADR UK has become a fantastic force for good. And I also know some of you are involved with the integrated data service. That's a really important new force for making really beneficial change here. Actually though, because we are socio-technical, to me, the most important positive development is this last component of the slide. In 2019, we observed that there was very little public engagement evidence, and indeed some reluctance in government to even undertake public engagement, almost for fear of if we ask the question, we might get people worried about whether it's appropriate to share data. There is now more emerging evidence, several examples of organisations who've undertaken public engagement, public dialogues, deliberative exercises of various kinds. And this growing body of evidence, I think, is really positive. It suggests that people, the public, citizens, the kind of people in my story at the beginning, they are supportive of data sharing and linkage. Obviously, subject to the caveat that it's got to be done securely and transparently. But this sort of institutional fear that the public might kind of turn against data sharing and linkage, in fact, does not seem to be borne out by the emerging public engagement evidence. I think as a community of people who care about data sharing and linkage, which is, I think, what unites us in this room, that is a really important finding that we should hang on to and drive forwards. However, going back to my personas, when we spoke to people who fitted into these personas, we did lots of interviews, we didn't have a fantastically happy picture presented back to us. The government researcher would often tell us that progress is slow, precisely because of this fear of using data might induce a bad public reaction. We heard several examples of academics saying, well, we had this great idea, but the funding ran out before we even got access to the data, which is like, just pause and think about that. I mean, that is crazy scenario. And the service coordinator in the charity sector don't really know where to begin. They don't know where to go or where to ask. So we kind of concluded that there's a lot of unhappy people. What the report then does is says, what might be the enablers of improvement to make a difference? And we pick out 4: public engagement, people, processes, and technical. And it was only after the report was published and I started to do presentations about it that I realized I kind of missed a trick, because the 4th one doesn't begin with P. So if anybody has an idea, and I can't think of a P which might be in place for technical, so if anybody's got a really great idea as to what the 4th one could be beginning with P, that would be great, because everybody likes a kind of bit of rhyming. Alliteration. Is that alliteration? Alliteration. Public engagement, again, to go back to my earlier comments, don't be scared of public engagement. Even though there's a lack of confidence about how to do it, there is growing evidence that people in the UK are comfortable with data sharing. There are some really excellent frameworks. The 5 Safes framework plays well when members of the public have it explained to them. And of course, we've got growing examples of privacy-enhancing technologies. I will actually come back to the 5 Safes frameworks in a minute. I have a comment about that. But in general, we encourage embracing the idea of public engagement. And I think one of the very heartening things that I see in lots of the academic projects and proposals that have come forward is how baked in public engagement is into the design of the research. And I think that's really, really important. And that public engagement supports both trustworthiness and value in terms of our core philosophy. Won't surprise you, given everything I've said about being socio-technical, that we see people as being key drivers of making data sharing and linkage happen. We highlight in particular some quite senior people, accounting officers. These are the people right at the top of government departments, chief data officers, and of course, senior analysts. They all need to be committed and to follow through on their commitment for data sharing and linkage to happen. And in fact, we're holding a round table in a couple of weeks where we want to bring some of these people together to say, well, what actually are you doing? You say that you're committed to data sharing and linkage. What actions have you put in place? And that really drives it quality. On process, this is where you sort of get, you remember I had my slide with the sad faces. This is where the faces get, the mouths really droop down and the faces look really miserable. There seems to be a real challenge around people working their way through what understanding the legal bases are for data sharing and linkage. It can often feel like people are not quite sure what they need to do, what loopholes they need to go through, and there's frankly a very strong sense in a number of areas. And we heard this about economic statistics, microdata, and also health statistics. Processes are just very long, very burdensome. Researchers feel very frustrated, and it can be difficult to find the right people to talk about. I mentioned the 5 Safes. You see my legal group of bullets there say narrow data sharing agreements often do not facilitate reuse. I think that's absolutely right. I was reflecting, most of you will know what the 5 Safes framework is. One of those 5 Safes is safe projects. I just wonder whether if we were to refresh the 5 Safes concept, we might move away from the word project to programs or purposes. Because I think that projects might drive the kind of the people at the gateways of data to expect the people wanting to get the data to be very, very specific, and perhaps more specific than they can reasonably be at the outset of their project when they're still in a kind of an exploratory phase. So I would just invite people who are responsible for taking these things forward to just have a little think about that 5 Safes, that word project, whether you could actually flex it a little bit and still get all of the value that you get from a very, very powerful framework. Interested in thoughts on that? You may well disagree with me. And then this is my technical, there's some technical foundations. I won't say much about this, but things like documentation, metadata, data standards, they are really it's like crucial sort of a base level foundation for enabling data sharing and linkage to work. And also worth noting my bottom bullet here, data linkage methodologies improving all the time. I think that is absolutely right. And again, another thing we should really celebrate, the learning that has gone on and the learning that ADR UK is able to distribute across the network of researchers, academics and government analysts. It's really, really good and really powerful. And I hope you've been hearing lots of examples of that yesterday, and you'll hear more today. So we think that if you go back to the personas, you recall that they had these frustrations. We think that if our recommendations, the 4 areas that I mentioned, my 3 Ps and my T, if those things are implemented, you'll have government researchers who are confident because of the public engagement. You'll get the university professor who will get access to linked data in good time. And actually, you might find a charity service coordinator knows how to get access through a data lab and to get aggregate insights from data. And you will find much more at the human level, much more smiley faces. So in summary, when we looked at data sharing and linkage for the public good, we think the pathway to the public good is through these 4 things. And what we think that demonstrates is that the only way to make progress is through a socio-technical approach, not a technical approach. And I hope you will join me in thinking that data sharing and linkage, it's not a technical issue, it's a socio-technical issue. Thank you.
Thanks, Ed. That was really, really interesting. Really enjoyed that. So, as yesterday, we've got the roving mics have appeared. So, yes, time for questions and of course suggestions for that final P. We're always welcome to. If we start halfway up there on the left. Thanks, Emma.
Hi, I'm Kate from UCL. So I just wanted to talk about maybe a 4th persona that wasn't up on the screen, because so in England at least, about 6% of the population have joined the National Data Opt-out Programme. And when we talk to public, the thing that seems to stop them from wanting to share their data for research and planning purposes is for-profit organisations who also do use the data. And I wonder if you could just speak a bit about that and what we could do to sort of gain trust on that side of things.
I have 2 questions. Firstly, could I have my microphone back on so I don't have to, so I can sort of, and then secondly, I think I heard what you said, but the echoing wasn't good. It was about what the 6% of people opting out and perhaps the concern about commercial use of data, is that right? Yeah, I mean, this is a really incredibly consistent finding from public engagement, is when I had that very positive picture, it comes with the caveat that people feel deeply uncomfortable about the commercial, perceived commercial benefits that might derive from data. Often a little bit viscerally, so to the extent when it starts to be unpacked, it becomes more nuanced, but at the sort of, the kind of top of the head level, it's the commercial use that makes people concerned. And I think really, in a sense, what that helps emphasize is that when we talk about the public good, that is public good for public benefit, not public good for private benefit. I think it's a crucial notion of the public good is that the benefits are socialized and shared, not privately held. So I think it's a really important aspect and kind of reinforcement of the notion of the public good. Yeah. Thank you. So does that answer your question? Does that answer your question? Thank you.
Hi, some of your findings are similar to the ones in the Goldacre review. What would you say? Would you say there are sort of any big differences between this this kind of data and results in that review?
I don't think any fundamental differences of sort of outlook or philosophy. We spoke to Ben a lot as he was doing his review, and definitely had a meeting of minds. He'll probably, if he was, I'm not sure if he's here, but if he was here, he'd probably hate me for saying this. I think he probably would be more at the technical than at the socio-technical end of things in terms of the way he looks at the world. So there may be a difference slightly in terms of emphasis. Certainly my fourth arm, the thing which isn't P, the T, that is very similar to the things that he was talking about. I mean, he was very strong on documentation, for example, and the role of documentation in enabling effective data sharing. So I don't think there are any fundamental differences of sort of outlook. Maybe we talk a little bit more about the sort of the social context in which data sharing and linkage takes place, and the sort of social purposes of it than he does. But I don't think there's any clash.
Thanks. Following on from people's concern about the data being used, that the sort of major opt-out campaigns that have happened with NHS data, people have actually been fed wrong information about how the data are being used. You know, if you don't click here, all your NHS data will be sold to an American company. So that there is the thing of feeding wrong information. The fact that there's no mechanism for opting back in again, if you're persuaded, if you change your mind, that is a problem. And then we've got the latest opt-out campaign, which we understand is taking off, is in response to commissioning the NHS England's Federated Data Platform, which, as it is handling individual patient care, people can't opt out, but there still will be an opt-out campaign which will make research data more moth-eaten. But here we've got the concern about commissioning handling of NHS data to a company which has widespread public distrust, Palantir, and no one's quite sure how the commissioning happened. So that's a problem in all those directions.
Well, a couple of things. One is, really specifically, I really like your observation about no option to opt back in. I think that's a really important point and well made. More generally, okay, so I've presented on the stage before you a very optimistic picture of the future where happy faces abound and shared and linked data serve the public good in the ways that I've described. I'm not under any illusion that we are also in something of a discourse battle where there is a discourse which is very, very opposed to, certainly with health data, sees it as being a potentially risky thing. And I think what I would say is that all of us in this room, and including us, we need to be very clear what we advocate for and why it is in the public benefit, because otherwise the kind of campaigns that you talk about will engage people, and they might engage people with misinformation potentially, and certainly with an incomplete picture. So I think it's really important that we're not simply sitting on the sidelines of this debate, that we're active participants in it. That doesn't mean to say that we need to kind of, march behind banners saying give data to Palantir. Obviously, we need to re-emphasize the kind of appropriate uses, back to my first question, and we need to emphasize the safe contexts in which data sharing takes place. But I think we have to recognize that there is a counter argument, and I think as analysts and researchers, and I guess there's civil servants here, we need to be willing to take on and advocate in favour of data sharing and linkage. That's what I hope our report does. That's what I hope our interventions do. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Lisa Trigg from Social Care Wales, and there's a few of it was a great presentation, thank you. There's a few of us here from Social Care Wales, and we've become huge advocates for public engagement, but frustrated because not all public engagement is true public engagement. So we've become real fans of I'm sure you're aware of the One London Citizen Summit and the deliberative engagement project they've been through with red lines and trade-offs. But then we talk about public engagement and people see it as a survey so I'm really interested to know your views on how good does public engagement need to be for it not to be tokenistic and for it to actually add value in some of these discussions?
Well, I think the first thing to say is I wouldn't say that a survey is not public engagement. I think I'd say it's not particularly... what you're doing with public engagement, I think, in any of these contexts is that you are testing what your social license is. That's what you're really doing. I don't think you're obtaining your social license because you can never engage with the whole totality of the population that's interested. What you're doing is you're as a curious organisation, you are testing how much social license do we really have here? What are the boundaries of it? What are the risk points? And I think a survey will not help you with that. It will give you, it'll probably tell you where you might want to then look further, but I don't think it's going to help you with that. So I would just sort of agree with you, but in a slightly nuanced way. It's probably a good starting point. One of the recommendations in the report I mentioned is that we see not just growing evidence, I mentioned that, but we also see growing kind of, it's almost like a growing profession of public engagement around data. And you see a couple of centres which are beginning to pull together how to do it well. And I think that's something which should be a really, really significant strand in, not just in data sharing and linkage work, actually I think in social science research going forwards is that sort of craft skill or professional skill of how to do it well. As I say, I wouldn't rubbish surveys per se. I think they're no good on their own because they don't enable you to explore what are the soft edges of my social license for this particular endeavour.
Hello, thank you. Ruth Gilbert from UCL. Great talk. I want to add to your technical point in that those of us that advocate wider use of data, one of the key selling points is that you can see whether others that have done analyses got them right or had the right emphasis. So it's a mechanism that we can sell in public engagement, that you can hold organisations to account in the way they use the data. And I didn't see enough of that on your list. So in order to do that, we need to know what purpose they're using it for. So there needs to be transparency from government, from commercial organisations, third sector, about publishing their results and publishing what they're doing. So I'd like to see more emphasis on that, because I think that ability to try to replicate results and hold organisations to account is a very important selling point.
I completely agree. In fact, we have a campaign that we call Intelligent Transparency. And the point of intelligent transparency is to say no transparency, zero transparency is obviously not a welcome property, but also sort of like dumb transparency, which either dumps a load of numbers out or just uses cherry picks a single number. That's not very good either. Intelligent transparency is a form of transparency which permits or facilitates external users, we're thinking about government here, external users to government to themselves understand how an insight was generated, on what basis, using what data. So I completely agree with you, and actually you're right, it was a flaw in my presentation that I didn't bring to it our advocacy of intelligent transparency, and I think it probably goes back to the very first question actually, that one of these points about commercial uses is that I suspect that one of the reasons that the public has this kind of visceral dislike is not just well, loads of people are making money. It's also like, we don't really understand what might be happening, because commercial is often inherently confidential and secretive in a way that the kind of research that we all do is absolutely focused on replicability and transparency. So good to call me out on that. Thank you.
Thanks, Ed. Susan McVie from Edinburgh
Hello.
University. Nice to see you again. Very good talk, as always. I wanted to probe you a little bit more on your proposal that we change the 5 safes and that the safe projects becomes safe programmes. I'm not sure how you would square that with the data minimisation principle. I certainly know that for some of the projects that we do in Scotland, we get pushed very hard by the Caldicot Guardians to make sure that we're very specific about the variables we want to look at, and it ties into every single research question. So I'm wondering what, rather than replacing safe projects with safe programmes, whether what we actually need is 6 safes, which is a nice alliteration, since you like alliteration, because some people will only really want to do projects, and those of us that want to do programmes should maybe have to think very carefully about how single projects fit within a larger programmatic piece of work.
Well, the first thing to say is I'm glad somebody's asked a question about that, because I only really thought of this point about the 5 safes on the train on the way up this morning. So it's very much a kind of, I'm like floating a balloon. I'm just putting it out and seeing how people react. I mean, I think if I can play back to you what I think you're saying, Susan, it's that, number one, the current 5 safes framework shouldn't change from what we've currently got, in the sense that all of those 5 safes are doing a job, but there is an extra thing on top, which might be might be a useful question to ask, which is about the programmatic context in which an individual project sits. So rather than replace, you're supplementing. Is that right?
Earlier in the, thank you. We did a public engagement event with the Royal Society of Edinburgh, which was called The Secret World of Data, and we used the 5 safes to illustrate to a public audience how we do this kind of research, what kind of, well, Harriet will love me for saying this, because Harriet Barker organised a set of hula hoops, so they were showing the hoops that we have to jump through in order to do this work safely. And I think that there were some questions about the way in which we identify very specifically what our questions are in order to only ask for the data that we need in order to address those questions. So I think by switching from projects to programmes, you could potentially weaken that, because that could be seen as a way of fishing. You know, if the programme requires, we just give us all your data and we'll fish for something in there, I think that could potentially weaken public confidence in how we use the data and how well it's thought through.
Yeah. So it could be seen as fishing, and I agree that fishing is that would be a way of pejoratively describing the kind of activities that I'm thinking about. You could also say it's curiosity-driven research. You could make a case which doesn't have the pejorative in it. The other point I wonder is there a sort of a timing issue here, that presumably it would just be a bit of an extra burden to have a 6th safe, which you have to do alongside the other safes. But could you have that first, the programmatic safe, kind of preceding the project safe? I don't know. I am literally, as you can tell, I'm literally thinking out loud. And maybe the lesson to self is, don't put into a presentation in front of 200 people something that you've only thought about on the train on the way up. But I'm very happy to hear other people's thoughts on that, because it could be that I'm just barking up the wrong tree. Wouldn't be the first time.
Hi, thanks. For a lovely talk. I'm Pia Hardlid, I'm from UCL as well. So I have a question about the ethics of public engagement in this environment. So quite frequently we do involvement events with parents who have kids with complex disability. They might have problems with housing, and they give up their time. I mean, we paid them, but still they give up their time on evenings and weekends. We as researchers give up our time. Quite frequently, junior researchers give up their time on evenings and weekends. And then, we're waiting 3, 4, 5 years for data. And the parents are asking, where is the data? Why aren't you doing it? And so I just wondered how you feel about that, because I don't think that's ethical, actually. So we can do public engagement, it's great, but there has to be then delivery, because data providers tell us we have to do it, and then they still don't give the data up for researchers.
I completely agree with you. I did a public engagement exercise, a public dialogue for the Royal Society, where the Royal Society was exploring a particular aspect of data with various groups around the country, and I was one of the quote-unquote experts to talk about the institutional framework for data. And I think we did about maybe 4. And I particularly remember thinking, but this is really tragic, because I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed hearing from these people. I enjoyed, getting a sense of their lives and what they're interested in and what they're not interested in. And I thought, well, I'm never going to see them again. It seemed really strange to have this kind of fleeting, momentary connection for the purpose of, the Royal Society produced a very good report which said, our public dialogue told us that. They get reduced to that couple of sentences. And I'd be very surprised if they ever got the feedback to say, this is what your comments to us led to us to conclude. So I completely agree with you. And I think actually when I was talking about the profession and the professional skill set that creates good engagement, it's this sort of thing. It's understanding that there's what defines a profession, I think, is the care throughout the life of an endeavour with which something is done. And I think part of that care is for the people that you're drawing insights from. So I completely agree with you. And I hadn't thought about it in ethical terms. I thought about it in that very interpersonal sense that I'd had that experience and felt it was very atomising, enjoyable but frustrating atomising. And I think for you to frame it as ethics, I think is a really, really nice way of looking at it. Yeah.
Hi, thank you for the interesting
Where
keynote.
are you? Sorry, I can't. Raise your hand.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
Oh, sorry.
I couldn't make eye
confusing.
contact with you because I couldn't hear where the sound was coming from. But
Oh, okay. Anyway, thank you very much. Very interesting keynote. And it's nice to actually see the Statistical Regulation Authority here engaging. So thank you very much. This has been a bit of a full circle for me. When I first started in this area in 2015, the first publication I had was enabling data linkage for public health and public good. So seeing this report feels like how much have we actually progressed since 2015? And it's interesting you're having these conversations and thoughts about expanding the 5 Safes framework. Myself and Felix Ritchie have actually got a publication in the Journal of Privacy and Confidentiality, which is forthcoming or just published, which actually explores the present and the future of the 5 Safes framework and addresses the fact that there have been different takes on it. There have been 5 Safes plus 1, 5 Safes plus 2. So I would really recommend having conversations with us about these thoughts and about these theories. And certainly in terms of our programs and going forward, one thing we really need to emphasize is to have conversations and communications a bit more. So thank you.
Thank you, and very happy to have that follow-up conversation. Having, as I said, put out there something which I wanted to test, to find there are people in the audience who've thought about it a lot. That's really, really good. On your point about how far have we really moved forwards, I think there is certainly a Groundhog Day feel to this, to some extent, in that there's quite a long history of reports and analysis which have talked about But more about data sharing within government, actually, not this angle that we're really pushing, which is no good just to share data within government. You need to make it available to the kind of researchers we have in the room here. But there's a long history. Gavin Freegard, who many of you will know, is a very respected data commentator, has produced a timeline of reports. And it does feel a bit like Groundhog Day. However, I don't know how many of you can actually remember the movie Groundhog Day, but in the movie Groundhog Day, it's not actually the case that for Bill Murray, every day is the same as every last day. Every day, he tries it a bit differently until eventually, after making lots and lots of incremental improvements day after day, he finds the escape hatch because he gets it right. And I think that's what we're engaged with. It's a difficult challenge. We're definitely in an environment now where data sharing and linkage has made real strides forward. I mentioned my list of things, ADR UK, public engagement, the data linking methodologies have come on enormously since 2015. I think we know more. I don't think we've yet escaped, but I think we're doing it a lot better, and I think we have pathways to improvement. So it is Groundhog Day, but in the literal sense of we are moving in the right direction.
Hi, Emma Gordon, ADR UK.
Hello.
So thanks for your great talk, Ed. And I think you talked in a very compelling way about the importance of transparency about, this use of data, and that the data should be used for public good. And obviously that's underpinned by legislation and everything. And I think that works for statistics production, and it works for research use of that data, because, to use the Digital Economy Act, we have to be transparent. We have to be demonstrating that the work's in the public good. And is there a gap about government use of data if it's not for statistics production? I'm just thinking about, there's a big discussion at the moment about the integrated data service and whether that could facilitate frictionless access to government data. But then how do we monitor that? How do we maintain that public trust?
Well, I'll give a view on that. It probably is not the mainstream UK Statistics Authority view. I apologise in advance to anybody in the room who is going to regard this as a treacherous outlook. You know how sometimes, to use a different analogy, different context, somebody say, we're redesigning this website and we've got to make it accessible for people who've got limited vision, for example. And what you'll realise is that if you make it work for them, you make it work for everybody. I think my view is for that within government use of data sharing, if you make data sharing linkage work for you as a community of academics, you'll make it work for government. I think it's the same thing. And I think to sort of think that there should be a lower kind of threshold within government, I think is probably not going to get you as far as saying, well, let's make it work in all the ways that we know make things work, and then that'll make it work in government as well. So I think there is probably a counter view to that, which is that would create too much friction within the government system. But then I suppose my counter to that counter is the friction is only a property of the failures of the things that I've outlined. The friction is, you can get rid of the friction. So essentially, I'd say probably start with the academic research, what works there first, actually. But I'm sure there are probably people in the room who right now want to punch me. So I'll be available for punches at any point later in the day.
We're pretty much there, Ray, but just Mary's been waiting for a long time with her hand up, so we'll just a very quick question, I think.
Hello, Mary Cleaton, ONS. I was just going to pick up on your kind of point about friction and some of the other points that have been brought up about quality and difficulty in accessing data. I noticed on your slides you mentioned metadata as being a big blocker, and in my experience that is absolutely true. Both like insufficient metadata, meaning that you might have to fish a bit too much, if we want to use that term, because you don't know what.
Curious research, I think, is
you're given a variable name and you don't know what the contents are. Lack of metadata meaning that linkage is difficult. Lack of metadata meaning that we don't necessarily want to give the data to researchers until we can put some kind of ad hoc metadata on top of it to assist them, because we don't want to give them data that they could misinterpret, for example. So it seems to me that metadata is quite a central problem that could, if fixed, could improve lots of different areas. And do you have any suggestions as to how we could try and improve metadata, particularly with admin data?
My main suggestion, so you're right, number one. Number two, my main suggestion is demonstration effects, is to show projects where there's been a concerted effort to improve metadata, demonstrate those and the beneficial outcomes that have come from them. Quite often, we hear stories about where the metadata are inadequate and the negative outcomes that arise. We hear less the stories where the metadata are really comprehensive and helpful and they're good outcomes. So that would be my main demonstration effect. What you say actually makes me think that we could probably write a whole sub-report on metadata. And I would begin that sub-report by saying metadata is not a technical issue, it's a socio-technical issue. I would double down on this as saying, don't think of it as just something which happens in the back room, of some sort of technical analyst. Actually, it's absolutely embedded with how the data then travel into the hands of other people and other organisations. So it's actually very socio-technical. Thank you.